The first thing Admiral Chen showed Dr. Pell was not a weapon schematic or a battle report. It was a grid. 214 squares, each one representing a ship. Frigates, destroyers, 2 carrier-class vessels, and the Arena, which had been humanity's most advanced research platform before it became square number 197. The grid was projected on the wall of the briefing room at Fleet Command Meridian, and it was color-coded, gray for disabled, blue for confirmed harvested, a thin red border around 7 squares that represented ships they'd managed to recover before the Mirati collection vessels arrived. 7 out of 214. The rest were somewhere in Mirati space now, or en route, drifting in magnetic tow behind collection ships the size of small moons. Pell stood in front of the grid for a long time without speaking. She was 31 years old, civilian contracted, and had spent the last 4 years working on electromagnetic shielding systems for deep space research stations, the kind of shielding that kept sensitive instruments from being corrupted by pulsar interference or the electromagnetic noise of a nearby star. She had a reputation for theoretical elegance and practical stubbornness, and she had never been inside a Fleet Command building before today. She was wearing the same clothes she'd been wearing when the summons came, a gray thermal layer and worn boots. She had not been given time to change. "The frequency," she said, still looking at the grid. 47.3 terahertz, said Admiral Chen. He was a compact man, silver-haired, with the careful stillness of someone who had spent decades deciding which facts to let show on his face. Right now he was letting quite a few show. With a modulation pattern we can't fully predict. That's part of what makes it effective. The carrier frequency is consistent, 47.3, but the modulation sweeps through a range of sub-millimeter wavelengths in a sequence that appears random to our instruments. "It's not random," Pell said. "We know that. It's biological." She turned away from the grid. "Their signal generators aren't machines. Or they're not only machines. The modulation pattern reflects something organic, a feedback system that adjusts in real time based on what it's hitting. It's not broadcasting a fixed disruptive signal. It's listening to the target and tuning itself." Chen looked at her steadily. "That's consistent with what our analysts have concluded. It took them 5 months to get there." "I've been working on the theoretical end of this for 2 years, Pell said. "I published a paper on Mirati frequency mechanics 18 months ago. Nobody from Fleet Command called me then. We weren't losing 200 ships then." She didn't have an answer for that. She looked back at the grid. "My prototype shield," she said. "You've read the specifications." "Completely. It's a resonance cancellation system. The shield generates a counter frequency, not a fixed one, which wouldn't work against an adaptive signal, but a responsive one. The shield has to listen the same way their weapon listens. It analyzes the incoming frequency in real time, calculates the inverse modulation pattern, and broadcasts a cancellation field around the hull. The incoming signal and the counter signal annihilate each other in the boundary layer. The ship's electronics never see the disruption." "Your prototype covers 1 ship," Chen said. "A research sloop. 412 tons. "Yes. The shipyard at Karev Point has 47 active vessels currently docked or in orbital pattern. The smallest is a patrol frigate at 6,000 tons. The largest is the carrier Alhambra at 240,000 tons. He paused. "The Mirati Harvest Fleet, we are calling it a Harvest Fleet because that is functionally what it is currently 18 days out from Karev Point. Based on their previous approach patterns, they will initiate their frequency emission at day 18. Which means from this moment you have 7 days, Pell said. 6 days and 22 hours. The room was quiet. Through the high windows, Pell could see the orbital dock where 3 fleet destroyers were being fitted for a deployment that everyone in this room knew would accomplish nothing. You could not fight a weapon you couldn't block. You could not shoot down a frequency. "I'll need fabrication access," she said. "Full military grade. My prototype uses civilian components because that's what I had. To scale it, I need tolerances I can't get from commercial suppliers. I need access to Fleet's EM fabrication labs, and I need them cleared for my exclusive use. Done. I need the full specifications of every ship currently docked at Karev Point. Hull geometries, internal electromagnetic profiles, existing shielding architectures. The counter-frequency calibration depends on the specific resonance characteristics of each hull. A blanket solution won't work. Each ship needs its own calibration profile. Done. You'll have the data within the hour. And I need Sova, Pell said. Chen's expression shifted slightly, not surprise, exactly, but something adjacent to it. You know Lieutenant Sova. I know of her. Her biology gives her something no instrument I have access to can replicate. The Mirati frequency, the way it adapts, the way it listens, she can perceive the harmonic structure of that modulation in a way that human instruments can only approximate. I've read the studies. Her half-Mirati auditory and neurological processing operates at sub-millimeter wavelength sensitivity. She can hear what their signal is doing. Lieutenant Sova has been assigned to signals intelligence. She has some difficulty, Chen paused, choosing words, interfacing with standard fleet operational environments. I'm not a standard fleet operational environment, Pell said. I'm a civilian contractor who needs the best tool available and has 6 days and 22 hours to use it. Give me Sova. Chen looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. She'll be at the fabrication lab in 2 hours. Dr. Pell. He stopped her as she turned toward the door. The shipyard at Karev Point represents 38% of humanity's active construction capacity. If it is harvested... I know what it means, Pell said. I'm going to the lab. The EM fabrication lab at Meridian Station occupied an entire pressurized deck, 20 meters of clean room floor space, precision-milled fabrication benches, and a Faraday cage large enough to park a shuttle inside. Pell had the prototype shield's core components spread across the primary bench within 30 minutes of arrival, and she was already running into the first problem when Sova walked through the door. She heard her before she saw her. Not footsteps, something else. A faint harmonic quality to the air pressure shifts as the door opened, as if the room's electromagnetic background had briefly reorganized itself around the newcomer's presence. Pell looked up. Lieutenant Sova was 26, tall, with a Mirati bilateral symmetry that showed most clearly in her facial bone structure, the slight flattening of the orbital ridges, the wider jaw, the eyes that were a light gray so uniform it was almost unsettling, without the tiny variations in iris pigmentation that human eyes always had. Her hair was dark and cut short. She was wearing a fleet utility uniform with no insignia beyond her rank tab, and she was carrying a field spectrum analyzer that Pell recognized as a modified military-grade unit, modified in ways that weren't standard fleet issue. She looked at the components spread across the bench. She looked at Pell. "You're the engineer," she said. "Pell." "Yes." Pell set down the resonance coupler she'd been examining. "You modified that analyzer." Sova glanced down at it. The standard unit reads to 10 gigahertz. I need sub-millimeter range. What did you use for the detector array? Grown it, Sova said. There was a pause. Biological substrate. Mirati-derived receptor tissue. I culture it myself. Pell absorbed this. That's how you extended the range. The tissue is sensitive to frequencies the instrument was never designed to detect. I interface it with the electronic readout through a transduction layer. Sova set the analyzer on the bench, not quite near Pell's components, not quite far from them. I was told you need my perception. What specifically do you think I can do? I need to understand the adaptive modulation pattern of the Mirati harvest signal, Pell said. My prototype shield works by generating a real-time inverse. But the inversion algorithm I'm using was derived from the 5 confirmed recordings we have of the harvest frequency. It's incomplete. The signal modulates faster than our instruments can fully resolve, which means my algorithm has gaps. Those gaps would make the shield unreliable. It would cancel most of the disruption, but the portions of the modulation it misses would still get through, and depending on which portions those are, the ship's electronics could still be compromised. Sova was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, it was carefully. You want me to fill the gaps. I want you to hear what the recordings can't capture and tell me what you hear. I want to build the inversion algorithm on complete information instead of partial. And you think I can do that? I think your nervous system processes sub-millimeter wavelength harmonic information the same way the Mirati signal generators do. Which means you don't just detect the frequency, you understand its structure. The way a musician doesn't just hear music but understands the intervals. Sova looked at her for a long moment. Her expression was not hostile, but it was careful, the expression of someone accustomed to people describing her capabilities as if they were reading from a file rather than talking to a person. "The recordings," she said. Pell pulled them up. 5 audio-converted frequency recordings, each one from a different harvest incident, translated into the audible range for human analysis. They sounded, to Pell's ears, like a sustained tone with a shimmering quality, a shimmer that moved in patterns she could intuit but not fully parse. Sova listened to the first one with her eyes closed. Then she opened her eyes and said, "Play them all at once." Pell blinked. "They'll interfere with each other." "Yes. That's what I want." Sova sat down on the bench stool and picked up the analyzer. The modulation pattern isn't random, and it isn't truly adaptive either, not the way you're describing. It's not listening to the target ship the way you'd think. It's cycling through a probabilistic sequence, a very large one, which is why it looks adaptive, that covers every resonant frequency range it might encounter. The sequence is derived from Mirati biological harmonic processing. It's essentially, she paused, her eyes going slightly distant, and Pell recognized the look of someone translating between two very different cognitive frameworks. It's the way their sensory processing sweeps a frequency environment. They don't perceive discrete frequencies the way humans do. They sweep continuously. Their signal generators replicate that sweep. Pell was writing rapidly. So the pattern isn't a response to the target. It's a full-spectrum sweep that happens to hit every resonant vulnerability anything in its path might have. Which is why it works on everything. It doesn't need to know what it's hitting. It hits everything, in sequence, faster than your electronics can compensate. Sova played the 5 recordings simultaneously. The resulting sound was complex, layered, and she tilted her head slightly, and her hands moved over the analyzer, and she said, "Here. The fundamental sweep rate is not 47.3 terahertz carrier with arbitrary modulation. The carrier is actually," she checked the analyzer reading, cross-referencing something Pell couldn't see, 47.311. The additional 11 megahertz is masked by the modulation envelope. It's the phase anchor. The modulation sequences are all phase-locked to that anchor point. Pell stopped writing. She stared at Sova. "If that's correct," she said slowly, "then the inversion algorithm doesn't need to track the full modulation sequence in real time. It just needs to lock to the phase anchor and generate the inverse from there. The anchor frequency doesn't change. If we cancel the anchor, the modulation sequence collapses," Sova said. "You're not chasing the whole signal. You're pulling the thread that holds it together." The silence that followed was the productive kind. Pell turned back to her components and started disassembling the resonance coupler she'd been examining. The prototype's inversion algorithm had been built around full-spectrum tracking, complex, power-intensive, computationally expensive, and essentially impossible to run on 47 ships simultaneously. A phase anchor lock was orders of magnitude simpler. "This changes the architecture," Pell said. "Is that a problem?" "It's the opposite of a problem. It means the processing load per ship drops by roughly 90%. She looked up. "We might actually be able to do this." Sova didn't smile, but something in her expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but a dropping of that careful watchfulness. "Just fractionally. What do you need from me first?" "I need you to verify the anchor frequency to 6 decimal places. Then I need you to listen to every harmonic overtone of the modulation sequence and tell me if there are secondary anchors, sub-patterns within the main sweep that have their own phase locks." "There are," Sova said. "I can already hear 3. They worked through the first night without stopping. By hour 14, the modified inversion algorithm existed in prototype code, and Pell had rebuilt the resonance coupler to lock specifically to the phase anchor rather than tracking the full spectrum. The coupler was the size of a shoebox and needed to be integrated into a ship's existing shielding architecture. That was the next problem. Every ship at Karev Point had a different architecture. The Alhambra's electromagnetic profile alone would require a different integration approach than any of the frigates. "We need a modular interface," Sova said. They were on hour 16, and she was sitting cross-legged on the lab floor with hull specification files spread around her, physical printouts and holographic displays in a circle she'd organized with a systematic thoroughness that Pell had found initially puzzling and was now beginning to recognize as a feature rather than an oddity. Sova did not like information floating loose. She fixed it in space so she could look at it whole. A base unit with configurable interface parameters. The phase anchor lock is the same for every ship. The interface with the existing hull electronics is different for each one. So we make the lock module universal and the interface module specific. Which means we need 47 different interface configurations, Pell said. 46. The Alhambra is too large for a single unit. She'll need 6, distributed across her hull sectors. Pell did the math. 52 distinct units, 52 distinct fabrication runs, each one requiring precision tolerances, each one requiring calibration testing before installation. In 5 days. We can fabricate in parallel, she said. If I set up 4 fabrication queues running simultaneously. 5, Sova said. The cage in the corner can run a second process if you reconfigure the tooling mount. Pell looked at the cage. She looked at Sova. You've worked in fabrication labs before. I've worked in several, Sova said neutrally. Fleet assigns me to places where my perception is useful and then finds that I make myself difficult to ignore. She returned to the hull specifications. I need the Alhambra's internal EM mapping to the 3rd subdeck level. The surface scan isn't sufficient. I'll request it. I also need the fabrication specifications for the resonance coupler housing. I can redesign the thermal dissipation layer. The current design will overheat under sustained operation. Pell looked at her. I noticed, Sova said simply. They argued for the first time on day 2, at hour 31, over the calibration threshold for the secondary sub-pattern locks. Pell wanted to set a tight threshold, maximum cancellation efficiency, no signal getting through. Sova wanted a looser threshold that would allow faster response time at the cost of 94% cancellation instead of 99%. 94% is not enough, Pell said. The residual 5% of the disruption signal would affect non-critical systems. Navigation, secondary communications. Not propulsion, not weapons, not life support. The ship stays operational. The ships have to be fully operational. The ships have to be operational enough to fight, Sova said. A tight threshold means the algorithm is calculating at maximum precision on every processing cycle. Under sustained frequency bombardment, which lasts 22 minutes on average, based on harvest incident data, the processing load will cause thermal cascade in the coupler array. You'll lose the shield entirely around the 14-minute mark. Pell opened her mouth, closed it, ran the thermal calculations herself, quickly, in the margin of the specification sheet she was holding. At minute 14, with a tight threshold, the coupler array reached critical temperature. 94%, she said. 94%, Sova said. They didn't apologize to each other. They moved on to the next problem, which was how to get 52 units fabricated, tested, and installed on 47 ships at a shipyard they couldn't reach before the shield needed to be operational. The answer, which they arrived at simultaneously at hour 34, was that they couldn't. They could fabricate the units here, at Meridian, and ship them to Karev Point, but installation would have to be done by the shipyard engineering teams remotely supervised by Pell and Sova. Which meant the interface specifications had to be so clear, so precisely documented, that a shipyard engineer who had never seen this technology before could install it correctly in under 6 hours per vessel. Pell started writing the installation documentation. Sova started auditing it, page by page, finding every assumption Pell had written in without flagging it, every step that required knowledge that a general engineer wouldn't have. She was methodical and she was merciless about it, and by the end of day 3, Pell had rewritten the documentation 4 times, and it was, she had to admit, significantly better. On day 3, hour 57, Sova looked at the first completed coupler unit, fresh out of the fabrication cage, sitting on the testing bench, and said, "We should test it." Not on instruments. Live. Pell looked at her. Live testing requires a Mira-T frequency source. Yes. We don't have a Mira-T frequency source. Sova was quiet for a moment. I can generate one. The silence in the lab was complete. You can, Pell stopped. Started again. Your biological frequency processing. You can generate the signal, not just receive it. I haven't done it in a controlled setting, Sova said. I've never tried. But the receptor tissue I use in the analyzer is derived from the same biological system that MIRI-T signal generators use. My own sensory processing generates a localized field. I've been aware of it for some time. I've never tried to amplify it deliberately. She was looking at the coupler unit rather than at Pell. Her voice was even. It would be significantly weaker than a shipboard emitter, but it might be enough to test the phase anchor lock. What does that do to you? Pell asked. Amplifying it. A pause. I don't know. The honest answer sat in the air between them. We don't have another option for live testing before deployment, Sova said. And I'd rather know the shield works before 47 ships depend on it. Pell looked at her for a long moment. Then we'll test it together, she said. In the Faraday cage. With every monitoring instrument we have running. Together, Sova said, and this time something in her voice was different. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent to gratitude that she hadn't been expecting. The test was not the plan they'd discussed. The plan had been to use Sova's localized biological emission inside the Faraday cage, controlled, measured, enough to verify that the phase anchor lock engaged correctly. That plan lasted until the end of Day 4, when the intelligence update arrived from the Karev Point surveillance network. The MIRI-T harvest fleet had accelerated. They were not 18 days out. They were 11, which meant the 7-day window had just become 4. We can't finish 52 units in 4 days, Pell said. She was looking at the fabrication queue logs. 13 units completed. 39 remaining. We finish what we can finish, Sova said. And we test what we have. She was already pulling up the fleet transit schedules. There's a courier vessel departing for Karev Point in 9 hours. If we have 20 units ready, they go on that courier. The remaining units go on a second courier in, she checked, 31 hours. That leaves the installation teams almost no time before the fleet arrives. Yes. Sova set down the schedule. And it means the test can't wait. If there's a fundamental problem with the phase anchor lock design, we need to know it now, not after 20 units are installed on ships at Karev Point. Pell looked at her. You're talking about a live MIRI-T frequency burst. Not your localized emission. An actual emitter. I'm talking about the emitter array the signals intelligence team uses for MIRI-T frequency research. It's on this station. I have access to it through my clearance. Sova met her eyes. It can generate a full-strength harvest signal. 30-second burst, which is the minimum operational duration of a harvest event. The emitter array was in a sealed test chamber 4 decks below the fabrication lab, a hardened room built specifically to contain directed electromagnetic emissions that would destroy instrumentation anywhere else on the station. The ceiling was a meter of signal-dampening composite. The walls were layered shielding alloy. And in the center of the floor was a mounting bracket that could hold exactly one thing for testing, a single ship section. A hull panel, usually, or a small equipment module. Or a person, Pell thought, looking at it. We sit in there, she said. With the coupler unit. When the emitter fires. The coupler is designed to shield the electronics of a ship. The frequency disrupts electronic systems, not biological ones. Sova's voice was careful. We're not the thing it would harm. But it would let us observe the coupler's performance directly. Whether the lock engages, how quickly, whether the LED status indicators on the unit respond correctly, whether there are any visible failure modes we haven't modeled. And if the coupler fails, then the emitter destroys every piece of electronic equipment in that room. Which is why we take nothing electronic in with us except the coupler unit itself. She paused. We take a mechanical timer. We count 8 seconds from the moment the burst begins. That's how long it takes the lock algorithm to complete its first full initialization cycle. If the lock engages within 8 seconds, the coupler will hold for the duration. If it doesn't, the emitter runs for 30 seconds, Pell said. Yes. But we'd know it failed at 8 seconds, and the remote operator can abort. Who's the remote operator? Chief Technician Mara. She's the signals intelligence team lead. She knows the emitter system and she's agreed to run it. Pell looked at the mounting bracket in the center of the room. She looked at the mechanical timer Sova was holding, a simple spring wound device, the kind used in environments where electronic instruments couldn't be trusted. She looked at the coupler unit in its carrying case. "We sit on the floor," she said. "There are no chairs. The bracket isn't designed for occupants." "Right." Pell picked up the carrying case. "Let's go." The test chamber was cold. The signal-dampening composite absorbed heat as efficiently as it absorbed radiation, and the room held a steady 9 degrees centigrade that neither of them had dressed for. They sat on the floor next to the mounting bracket, the coupler unit between them, its status indicators dark. Pell had bolted the unit to the bracket with a mechanical fastener. No power tools, no electronic equipment. The only electronics in the room were inside the coupler unit itself, in standby mode. Sova wound the mechanical timer and set it on the floor between them. 30 seconds total. A red mark at 8. Through the sealed port in the door, a thick glass circle reinforced with shielding mesh, Pell could see Chief Technician Mara at the emitter control panel, 40 centimeters of composite wall and a meter of corridor between them. Mara raised her hand. "Ready." "When she fires it," Sova said quietly, "the coupler will initialize. The first 3 seconds are processing. The algorithm is analyzing the incoming signal, finding the phase anchor. Nothing visible will happen. Around second 4, the lock should engage and the status indicators should go from dark to amber. Amber means partial lock. The primary anchor is found, but the subpatterns aren't fully resolved. By second 6 or 7, if everything works, they should go green." "And if they go red?" Pell said. "Red means the algorithm found the anchor, but the cancellation field couldn't establish within the boundary layer. It would mean a hardware problem in the resonance coupler itself." She paused. "The emitter would still be running." "And if they stay dark?" "Then the algorithm didn't initialize. Which means the fundamental design assumption is wrong, and the signal's phase anchor isn't what we think it is." Sova looked at her steadily. "And the emitter would still be running." "Right," Pell said. She looked at the timer. "If it stays dark, you signal Mara to abort immediately." "Yes." "And if it goes amber but doesn't reach green by second 8?" "We wait to second 12. Amber at 8 seconds might mean the sub-pattern locks are just slow. Green by 12 is still a usable result." Sova's voice was even. "But red at any point, or dark at 8 seconds, and I signal abort." Pell nodded. She looked at the coupler unit's dark indicators. She looked at the port in the door, at Mara's face beyond the glass. "I want to say something," Pell said. Sova waited. "If this works, when this works, the credit for the phase anchor insight is yours. I'll put that in every document, every report, every briefing. It will be on the record." Sova was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't concerned about credit." "I know. I'm concerned about it on your behalf." Pell met her eyes. "You've spent your career being useful to people who don't fully credit you." "I'm not doing that." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was, Pell thought, the silence of two people who had reached an understanding that didn't need elaboration. "Ready," Sova said. Pell raised her hand to Mara. A thumbs up. Mara turned to the control panel. The sound was not a sound. It was an absence of something, a pressure change that had no physical explanation, and then the room shifted in a way that Pell had no vocabulary for. The frequency was above human hearing, but the body registered it anyway. A vibration in the sternum, a faint nausea at the back of the throat, a sensation in the teeth that was not pain but was the precise frequency neighbor of pain. The cold air seemed to thicken. The coupler's status indicators stayed dark. 1 second. Phew. Pell's eyes were on the indicators. Sova had gone very still beside her, not rigid, not afraid, but with a particular stillness of someone who was listening with her entire nervous system. Pell couldn't imagine what she was perceiving right now, whether the harvest frequency felt different from inside its field than from outside it, whether there was something the mirror T signal was doing that only Sova could detect. 3 seconds. Dark. The nausea intensified slightly. Pell kept her eyes on the coupler. 4 seconds. The leftmost indicator went amber. 1 anchor found. The algorithm was running. 5 seconds. The second indicator went amber. The third stayed dark. Pell's hands were on her knees. She was not touching the coupler. Touching it could introduce electromagnetic interference from her body's bioelectric field, fractional, probably irrelevant, but she was not going to introduce any variable she could avoid. 6 seconds. The third indicator went amber. All three amber. Sub-pattern locks in progress. 7 seconds. The indicators stayed amber. Pell looked at the mechanical timer. The red mark at 8 seconds was 1 second away. Beside her, Sova had not moved. She was still listening to something Pell couldn't hear, something in the frequency field that the coupler's indicators couldn't show. 8 seconds. The indicators were still amber. The timer's second hand crossed the red mark. Pell did not look away from the indicators. She did not look at the timer. She did not look at Mara. She looked at the three amber lights and she counted 1, 2, 3, 4. She was counting past 8 now, into the grace window, and the amber lights were not changing, and she was thinking about 47 ships at Karev Point, about the Alhambra's 2,000 crew, about 214 gray squares on Admiral Chen's grid. 9 seconds. The three indicators went green simultaneously. The pressure in Pell's sternum dissolved. The frequency field was still running, the coupler was running inside it, cancellation field active, the phase anchor lock holding, and the indicators were green, steady green, not flickering. She turned to look at Sova. Sova was looking at her. Her expression was not celebration, it was something quieter than that, more considered, the expression of someone who has just verified a very important fact about the world and is letting its weight settle correctly. "It's holding," Pell said. "It's holding," Sova said. "The sub-pattern locks took longer than I modeled. I'll need to adjust the initialization parameters. The algorithm should find the secondary anchors faster." "How much faster can you make it?" 7 seconds maximum. Probably 6. That's the window we'll need to document. 6 to 7 seconds from signal impact to full shield establishment. Ships will need to know their electronics are vulnerable for that window. 6 seconds, Sova said, is survivable. At the start of a harvest event, the emitters aren't at full intensity. They ramp up over approximately 15 seconds. 6 seconds into the ramp is roughly 30% intensity. Enough to disrupt navigation, but not propulsion, Pell said. Not propulsion, not weapons, Sova confirmed. Mara's face appeared at the port, eyebrows raised in inquiry. Pell gave a thumbs up. Through the wall, she heard the emitter power down, and the pressure in the room normalized with a speed that was almost dizzying. The coupler's indicators held green for 4 more seconds after the field died. Then they went dark again, standby mode, waiting. Pell sat on the cold floor and did not move for a moment. She felt hollowed out in the way that extreme focus, released all at once, leaves a person, not empty exactly, but suddenly aware of how small the room was and how cold, and how close together she and Sova were sitting. 7 seconds, she said. 7 seconds, Sova said. We're going to make this work. Sova looked at the coupler unit. We already are, she said. The courier left for Karev Point 11 hours later with 23 units. 3 more than planned, because Sova had run 2 fabrication queues through an overnight cycle that was not technically authorized and Pell had not asked where the authorization came from. The second courier left 29 hours after that with 24 units. The last 4 completed at a pace that left both of them with solvent burns on their hands from rushed degreasing steps that should have used gloves. 47 units. 47 ships. Plus the 5 distributed across the Alhambra's hull sectors, because Sova had discovered during the hull mapping analysis that the carrier's electromagnetic profile was even more complex than the specifications suggested. It had shielding architectures from 3 different construction generations, and the interference pattern between them created resonance nodes that required individual attention. 52 units. 47 ships. 3 days remaining. The installation briefings happened over quantum lag communications links to Karev Point, with Pell walking the shipyard engineering teams through the documentation she and Sova had written and rewritten, and Sova monitoring the frequency calibration data from each installation as the teams reported it in. The shipyard engineers were competent and many of them were fast, but the documentation could not account for every local variable. 2 installations had to be completely redone because the hull survey data in the specifications didn't match what the engineers found when they opened the access panels. And there were 3 hours on the second day when Pell was simultaneously on communications links with 4 different engineering teams while Sova was recalculating the interface parameters for the Alhambra's secondary hull sector, and neither of them spoke to each other at all because there was no time for anything except the immediate technical problem in front of them. When the 4 links dropped at the same time, all 4 installations confirmed, all 4 calibrations nominal, Pell put her head down on the lab bench and breathed for 60 seconds. She became aware that Sova had placed a cup of something hot beside her hand. She picked it up without lifting her head. It was coffee, or something approximating it. She drank it without looking up. The Alhambra Sector 3 calibration is off by 0.02 on the secondary sub-pattern lock, Sova said. Her voice was even. It's within tolerance. I want to flag it anyway. Pell lifted her head. How much within tolerance? 4% margin. The lock will hold under normal harvest intensity. If the emitters are at higher than standard intensity, which we have no evidence they can do but also no evidence they can't, Sector 3 might drop to 89% cancellation. 89% would let enough disruption through to knock out the Alhambra's secondary sensor array. Yes. She'd be flying partially blind. Sova looked at her steadily. I can recalibrate remotely if I have a direct link to the Sector 3 unit during the battle. Real-time adjustment. Pell looked at her. You'd be doing that from here. No. I'd need to be at Karev Point. On the Alhambra. The communications link to Karev Point had a 17-second quantum lag. Real-time calibration was impossible across that gap. Sova was right. She'd have to be there. Chen won't like that, Pell said. Chen wants the Alhambra fully operational. I'm coming with you, Pell said. It was not something she had planned to say. She heard herself say it and understood, in the moment after, that she meant it, not because the Alhambra required her specifically, but because Sova would be on the flagship's bridge running real-time frequency calibration for 47 ships while a Mirati Harvest fleet fired the most effective weapon humanity had ever encountered, and the calibration system Sova would be managing was a system Pell had designed, and if something went wrong with it, there was exactly one person who could fix it in the time available. The Alhambra's engineering section will have everything you'd need, Sova said. She was not arguing. I know. Pell was already pulling up the fleet transit schedule. There's a fast courier leaving in 4 hours. If we're on it, we arrive at Karev Point with 18 hours before the projected Harvest fleet arrival. 18 hours, Sova said. Enough time to verify every installation in person. We can't physically reach every ship in 18 hours. No. But we can reach the ones I'm most concerned about. Pell pulled up the installation logs. The Tarrant had an interface anomaly on Unit 7 that the engineering team resolved but didn't fully document. The patrol frigate Ika has a hull resonance characteristic I've never seen before. It showed up in the calibration data and I don't know what's causing it. And the Alhambra's Sector 3. She looked at Sova. 3 ships. 18 hours. It's enough. They were on the courier in 3 hours, 50 minutes. Karev Point was not the largest human installation Pell had ever seen, but it was the most alive. 47 ships in various states of completion, repair, or readiness, arrayed in orbital pattern around a shipyard habitat that had been operating continuously for 30 years. The ships were lit from within and without, running lights, work lights, the blue-white glow of plasma cutters where construction was still ongoing. From the courier's viewport, they looked like a small city that had decided to exist in space. They spent 11 of the 18 hours moving between ships. Pell found the hull resonance anomaly on the Ika, a legacy shielding element from an older design generation that was creating a localized interference pattern with the coupler unit's boundary layer. She spent 3 hours redesigning the boundary layer projection geometry on-site, with tools borrowed from the Ika's own engineering stores and Sova standing beside her recalibrating the sub-pattern lock in real time as Pell modified the hardware. Clockwise on the secondary resonator, Sova said. Pell adjusted. How's the lock? Still drifting. Counterclockwise by half a mark. Half a mark is about 11 degrees of arc on the resonator collar. Sova was watching the analyzer's readout, the one with the biological tissue detector array. There. Hold. Pell held. She could feel the slight vibration of the resonator under her hands, a harmonic quality to it that she had never been able to perceive before spending a week working beside someone who perceived it constantly. Green, Sova said. Sector lock nominal. They reached the Alhambra with 6 hours to spare. The Sector 3 recalibration took 90 minutes. The remaining 4.5 hours were spent in the Alhambra's operations center, where Sova established her calibration monitoring station, a direct data link to all 52 coupler units across the fleet, with Sova's modified analyzer connected as the primary sensing instrument. From here, she could watch the lock status of every unit in real time and push calibration adjustments to any of them with a 2-second transmission lag. If a lock starts to drift during the battle, she said, walking Pell through the station, I'll see it here, identify the cause, calculate the correction, and push it. The unit applies the correction automatically. 3 to 5 seconds total, end to end. What if multiple units drift simultaneously? Then I prioritize by ship class and work through them in order. What if they all drift simultaneously? Sova looked at her. Then the Mirati have done something to their signal we haven't anticipated. In which case, I need you to be in the engineering section ready to modify the base algorithm. I'll be in the engineering section. Pell. Sova's voice shifted slightly, a change in register she'd heard only a few times before, when Sova was saying something she'd been considering for longer than the conversation suggested. The Alhambra's crew will be depending on this system. Every ship here will be. If it fails. It won't fail, Pell said. I need you to know that if it does, it's not because of what you designed. The design is right. The phase anchor insight was mine, but the cancellation architecture was yours, and it's elegant, and it works. Whatever happens in the next, she checked the operations center chronometer, 5 hours and 40 minutes, that's true. Pell was quiet for a moment. 4 days ago, she said, you said you weren't concerned about credit. This isn't about credit, Sova said. It's about what I know. Pell nodded once. She thought about the 8 seconds in the test chamber, the amber lights holding, Sova listening to something Pell couldn't hear, both of them sitting on that cold floor with every variable in the world outside their control. What she had felt in those 8 seconds was not exactly fear. It was more precise than that. It was the feeling of having done everything correctly and not yet knowing if correctly was enough. That feeling, she was about to discover, had a much larger version. The Mirati Harvest Fleet arrived 40 minutes ahead of projection. Pell was in the Alhambra's engineering section when the proximity alert fired, a sound she'd never heard before, a repeating tone that seemed calibrated to induce a very specific kind of alertness. She was at the secondary engineering console with the base algorithm running on the local system, monitoring the same coupler lock data that Sova was watching from the operations center 4 decks above. All 52 units showed nominal green across the board. The coupler network was up. She opened a communications channel to Sova. I see them on the approach feed. 11 vessels. 12. Sova's voice was steady. There's a 12th behind the primary formation. Smaller. Different profile. I've never seen that configuration in the intelligence data. A new class. Or a modified existing class. I don't know what it's doing yet. The Alhambra's captain, a compact woman named Fleet Captain Reyes, came on the all-ship channel. All hands, this is the captain. Mirati Harvest Fleet has entered effective range. Shield systems are active. Maintain stations. We are not engaging offensively. Our objective is to hold position and protect the shipyard. The shields will do the work. Trust the shields. Pell thought, please let her be right to say that. The Mirati ships were visible now on the engineering section's tactical feed, 11 primary vessels in a curved formation, the concave face of the curve directed toward Karev Point, which was how they always approached. The formation maximized the collective coverage of their frequency emitters. When they fired, every ship in the Karev Point orbital pattern would be inside the field simultaneously. 42 seconds to estimated emission range, said the tactical system. Pell's hands were on the console, not because she needed to touch anything yet, but because she needed to be in contact with something physical. Sova, she said. I'm here, Sova said. All locks nominal. Initialization systems armed. When the signal hits, the units will go through their initialization cycles. 6 to 7 seconds to full lock. In that window, be ready. Ready. 20 seconds, said the tactical system. The engineering section was quiet except for the ventilation and the pulse of the drive systems running at station-keeping power. 8 people at 8 consoles, each one doing something Pell didn't fully understand because their jobs were not her job, but all of them steady, watching their instruments. 10 seconds. Pell thought about 214 gray squares. She thought about the Arena, which had been humanity's most advanced research platform and was now drifting somewhere in Mirati space. She thought about 7 ships out of 214 recovered. She thought about 47.311 terahertz, and the thread that held the signal together, and what happened when you pulled it. "Emission detected," said the tactical system, and then everything changed. The harvest frequency hit the Alhambra's hull, and Pell felt it. Not the toothache pressure of the test chamber, but something larger, a whole-body sensation of something vast pressing against the outside of the ship, looking for a way in. The lights in the engineering section flickered once. Just once. Then the coupler network initialized. On Pell's console, 52 indicators cycling amber. She watched them. The Tarrant, amber, 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 green, green, green. 5.8 seconds. The patrol frigate Ika, amber, amber, green, green. 4.9 seconds. The carrier Alhambra's own sectors 1 through 6, amber, 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 green, green, green. 5 sectors went green at 5.4 seconds. Sector 3 held amber. "Sector 3, Pell said. "I see it," Sova said immediately. "Drift on the secondary sub-pattern lock, 0.03 deviation, pushing correction now." 3 seconds. Sector 3 went green. All 52 indicators, green. Pell let out a breath she had not been aware of holding. The frequency field was still running. She could feel it, that vast exterior pressure, the Mirati harvest fleet sustaining their emission at full power, and the Alhambra's lights were steady, and the engineering consoles were running normally, and the drives were responding normally, and the tactical feed showed 11 Mirati ships holding their formation. Firing. Firing at ships that were not going dark. "Status from fleet," she said into the channel. The response came from the operations center. 45 of 47 ships fully nominal. The remaining 2, both patrol frigates, had experienced the navigation disruption Sova had predicted during the lock initialization window, but both had recovered at full lock establishment and were operational. 2 ships took navigation hits in the window, Pell said. "Expected," Sova said. "Intensity is higher than standard. They're pushing harder." The 12th Mirati vessel, the one Sova hadn't recognized, had moved into a flanking position on the right side of the formation. As Pell watched the tactical feed, it separated from the main formation's emission pattern. A different frequency structure, according to the feed data. A second signal, layered beneath the primary harvest frequency. "Sova," she said. "The 12th ship. I see it." A pause, longer than any pause Sova had made in the past week. "It's a disruptor. Specifically designed to interfere with counter-frequency systems. It's broadcasting a jamming signal targeted at the phase anchor bandwidth." Pell's hands moved before she consciously directed them. She pulled up the base algorithm. The jamming signal was trying to mask the phase anchor, to make the carrier frequency appear to be at a different point, so the coupler's lock would target the wrong location and the cancellation field would be generated at the wrong frequency. "If the lock shifts to the false anchor," she said, "the cancellation field inverts at the wrong frequency and amplifies the disruption instead of blocking it." Sova's voice was still even, which is considerably worse than no shield at all. "I can rewrite the lock criteria to ignore signals in the jamming bandwidth." "How long?" 90 seconds if nothing goes wrong. Some of the locks are already starting to track the false anchor. You have about 45 seconds before the first units shift." Pell stopped talking and started working. The algorithm was running on the local system. She pulled up the lock criteria module, the section that defined what frequencies the phase anchor search would target, and began adding exclusion parameters. The jamming bandwidth was visible in the coupler data, a cluster of frequencies between 46 and 48 terahertz, deliberately overlapping with the real anchor at 47.311. She added the exclusion, tested it against the current signal data on a local simulation. The simulation showed the lock holding on the real anchor, ignoring the false one. She pushed the update to all 52 units. "Update pushed," she said. 38 seconds. 32 seconds, Sova said. 3 units had already shifted to the false anchor. Recalibrating. 8 seconds of silence. Then, all 3 nominal. Real anchor locked across the fleet. Pell looked at the tactical feed. The Mirati formation had not moved. The frequency emission was still running. The 12th ship was still broadcasting its jamming signal. But the jamming signal was doing nothing now. The exclusion parameters had closed the window it had been exploiting. "They'll try something else," Pell said. "Probably," Sova said. "Adjust the exclusion parameters to cover a wider bandwidth, in case they shift the jamming frequency." Pell widened the exclusion. The coupler locks held. On the tactical feed, the Mirror T formation continued to fire for another 4 minutes and 17 seconds. During that time, Sova made 11 calibration adjustments, 8 minor drift corrections, 2 sub-pattern realignments, and 1 full lock recalibration on the Tarrant, whose Sector 4 coupler had developed a hardware vibration from the sustained frequency exposure and was resonating in a way that threatened to destabilize its boundary layer. Pell rerouted the Sector 4 load to Sectors 3 and 5, redistributing the cancellation field geometry in real time based on hull specifications she had memorized over the past week. The Tarrant held. Everything held. The emission stopped. It did not stop gradually. It stopped completely, between 1 second and the next, as if someone had cut a wire. The exterior pressure Pell had been feeling through the hull simply ceased, and the silence of open space, which was not actual silence but the particular quality of absence that space had, settled around the Alhambra. On the tactical feed, the 11 primary Mirror T vessels were still in formation. Their emitters had powered down. The 12th vessel, the Disruptor, had stopped broadcasting. They were not retreating. They were not advancing. They were holding position. Pell stared at the tactical feed. She had seen the harvest incident data. She knew that Mirror T harvest fleets did not hold position. When the emission phase was complete, they moved forward to collect the disabled ships. They had always moved forward to collect the disabled ships. It was, as Admiral Chen had said, functionally harvesting. They came, they disabled, they collected, they departed. The operation had a rhythm, and the rhythm did not include holding position and doing nothing. "Operations Center," she said. "Sova." "I see them," Sova said. "What are they doing?" A pause. Longer than any pause Sova had made in the test chamber or the fabrication lab or any of the preceding week's crisis moments. Long enough that Pell found herself checking the communications channel to make sure it was still active. "They don't know what to do," Sova said. The words were quiet. Not triumphant. Thoughtful, in the way that Sova's voice was always thoughtful when she was saying something true, as if truth required a different register than ordinary speech. Pell looked at the tactical feed. 11 ships, plus the Disruptor. They had come here to harvest a shipyard. They had fired their weapon, the weapon that had never, not once in 214 encounters, failed to do what it was supposed to do. And the ships before them were lit and powered and operational, and the crew of the Alhambra were at their stations, and the Karev Point shipyard was intact behind them, and the Mirror T harvest fleet was sitting in open space not knowing what had happened to the universe they understood. Pell's hands were still on the calibration controls. "Neither do I," she said. "Keep going." For a moment neither of them spoke. The tactical feed showed 12 Mirror T vessels, motionless. The Alhambra systems showed nominal across every metric. The 52 coupler units were green, all of them, steady green in the residual emission field that the Mirror T ships were still generating passively, the low-level background frequency of their technology, present even when the emitters were offline, and the couplers were locking it out. "Fleet status," Pell said to the operations channel. 47 ships fully operational, came the response. 0 casualties. 0 disablements. The Tarrant is reporting a hardware vibration in Sector 4, non-critical, engineering team is assessing. Tell the Tarrant to hold the Sector 3 and Sector 5 redistribution until the Sector 4 vibration is resolved. I'll send the engineering specs. Acknowledged. On the tactical feed, the 12th Mirror T vessel, the Disruptor, slowly moved back toward the main formation. It did not depart. None of them departed. They reformed, the Disruptor taking a position at the center of the formation, and they held. "They're communicating," Sova said. "Within the fleet. The frequency pattern of their inter-ship communications has changed. I can't translate it, that's beyond what I can do, but the pattern is different from standard operational communication. The tempo is different." "Different how?" "Irregular. The standard tempo is steady, command and acknowledge, command and acknowledge. This is debate. I think." A pause. "Or something that functions like debate." Pell looked at the tactical feed. She thought about what Sova had said, they don't know what to do. She thought about what it meant for a species that had spent the last 6 months harvesting human ships at will to encounter, for the first time, ships that could not be harvested. Not because the ships fought back. Not because humanity had found a weapon to counter theirs. But because the ships simply would not go dark. The weapon that had never failed had failed. And the Mirati, who had never needed to plan for failure, were planning now. What do you think they'll do? Pell asked. I don't know, Sova said. Return. Regroup. Bring something we haven't seen yet. Another pause. Or decide it isn't worth it. Is that possible? I don't know, Sova said again. The honesty in her voice was unchanged, the same quality it had had in the test chamber, when she'd said I don't know about what amplifying her biological emission would do to her. It was the honesty of someone who had learned, perhaps early and perhaps with difficulty, that I don't know was a complete and sufficient answer when it was the true one. What I know is that they have never met resistance they didn't have a tool for. This is new for them. Fleet Captain Reyes came on the all-ship channel. All hands, the Mirati fleet is holding position. All shield systems remain active. Maintain stations. A pause. They're not used to this. No, Pell thought. They're not. She kept her hands on the calibration controls. On the screen before her, 52 green indicators watched back. The Mirati formation held at distance, 12 ships, a technology that had taken 214 ships from humanity, trying to understand what had changed. An hour passed. The Mirati departed. Not suddenly. They turned, the formation maintaining its shape, and moved away from Karev Point at a pace that suggested no urgency and perhaps some deliberateness, as if they wanted to be seen leaving rather than perceived as fleeing. Pell watched them on the tactical feed until they crossed the range threshold and the display switched from direct observation to projected track. The operations center came on the channel. Dr. Pell, we are showing the Mirati fleet at departure vector. All 52 shield units remain active and nominal. Fleet Captain Reyes is requesting a status briefing at your earliest convenience. Give me 10 minutes, Pell said. She sat for a moment at the engineering console. The coupler status indicators were still green, the passive emission field from the departing Mirati ships was fading, and the couplers were tracking it down, their locks maintaining even as the signal weakened. There was something almost elegant about watching it, the locks holding all the way to the threshold where the field was too weak to require blocking, and then the indicators cycling back to standby without any intervention. She opened the communications channel to the operations center. Sova. Still here, Sova said. How long did they stay? 1 hour, 7 minutes, and 43 seconds after the emission stopped. 47 ships, Pell said. 2,000 total crew across the fleet. The Alhambra's shipyard. All of it intact. Yes. A pause. You'll need to submit a technical report to Fleet Command. The jamming signal they deployed, the 12th ship, that's new. They'll try that again, and they'll try it differently. The exclusion parameter fix works for the bandwidth they use today, but if they shift their jamming frequency. I know. I'll write the countermeasures into the next algorithm update. Pell leaned back in her chair. Her back ached in a way she hadn't noticed until now. The report will take a week. The technical documentation for fleet-scale deployment will take 2 weeks, Sova said. We need to define a standard installation protocol, something that shipyard engineers anywhere can follow without us supervising it in person. The calibration process needs to be automated to the extent possible. The exclusion parameters need to be updatable remotely without requiring a full algorithm push. She paused. And the thermal management in the Sector 4 coupler design needs to be corrected. The vibration the Terrant experienced was a resonance interaction I didn't anticipate. I can fix it in the design, but every deployed unit will need a hardware patch. 47 hardware patches. Plus every unit in the next production run, which Fleet Command will almost certainly request immediately. Another pause. We have work to do, Pell. Pell looked at the standby indicators on her console. 52 units, all dark now, waiting for the next time they were needed. In the tactical feed, the Mirati departure vector was a fading line moving away from Karev Point. They don't know what to do. She thought about the moment, those 8 seconds in the test chamber, and then the longer 8 seconds of not knowing during the battle, And then the moment when 12 Mirati ships sat motionless in space and did something that Mirati harvest fleets had never done before. She thought about what it meant to encounter a problem that none of your tools solved. She had spent a week living inside that feeling. She knew what it did to you. She did not know what it would do to the Mirati, or what they would come back with, or what the next problem would be. She knew that she and Sova would be working on it. "I know," she said. "Let's go write the report." From the operations center, 4 decks above, she heard, for the first time, something she was fairly certain was Sova almost laughing. It was a good sound. She filed it away beside the green indicators and the phase anchor frequency and the particular quality of silence that meant the shield was holding, and she started on the report.